My name is Katie Balls and I'm the Washington editor of The Times and Sunday Times.
We've been discussing Jeffrey Epstein a lot of late, something that Donald Trump isn't keen on. He keeps asking why everyone is still talking about Jeffrey Epstein. Since his Department of Justice sort of said case closed on Epstein, there's been something of an uproar in MAGA land. Is that fair to say? Is uproar the right word?
I think it depends on the day of the week, but there's certainly been an uproar on certain days in Washington, D.C. from MAGA, the Make America Great Again movement. And this, as you say, started just over a fortnight ago. Obviously, the Epstein story has been going on for much longer, but this has risen up the news agenda in terms of the White House, in terms of American politics, because of this memo that was released by the Department of Justice and FBI, effectively saying there's nothing to see here. Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide, and also there was no so-called client list. And this idea of a client list has long been talked about by figures in MAGA world, which is, did he have a list of clients that he could then blackmail, shadowy dark money, this type of thing? And if so, will that list of names be released? Now, for the Trump administration to come out and say, actually, we've looked at the files, there's nothing to see, took the base by surprise, because this has been one of the big things they were talking about in the build-up to the election. And Donald Trump himself appeared in an interview during the campaign to suggest he was open to releasing more files. You look at some of Donald Trump's picks. So, for example, Kash Patel, the head of the FBI, also his deputy. These are figures who have talked about Jeffrey Epstein conspiracy theories, suggesting there could be truth in them when they weren't in the administration. So when they were put in these senior roles in intelligence, there is a sense that this would finally be transparency, bringing down the deep state, and people got quite excited. Then you also have Pam Bondi, the Attorney General. Now, Pam Bondi even hosted a range of MAGA influencers to look at files related to Epstein, but it was a bit of a disappointment to those who went there, because they said, well, a lot of this is redacted. We've seen some of this before. We want even greater transparency. And then probably Pam Bondi's biggest sin in the eyes of MAGA is she went on Fox News and said, the client list is on my desk, or at least that's what it seemed she said at the time. And now she says there's no client list. So you have a whole group who had their hopes really raised that with Donald Trump, there would be this big release of the files. They felt the Democrats were hiding it for sinister reasons. And that hasn't happened. You've had Donald Trump instead saying he's bored, in caps lock sometimes, and eventually a changing of the position on Friday, whereby he said he was going to, take action, see if a grand jury would release some of the testimony.
And some of the MAGA people that you've spoken to, what is their criticism? And interestingly, is their criticism of Trump or of the lieutenants beneath him who they feel maybe have badly served him?
So I think in truth it's a bit of a mix. Donald Trump is still very powerful when it comes to his hold over his base. There are complaints about this. You have figures saying they are disappointed in the handling of it. But certainly, I think it's a bit more comfortable for them to find, a figure a little bit lower down to blame. So Pam Blondie, as some of the MAGA base call her, she has become a target of ire because people say, well, she's messed this up. It's the DOJ being clumsy, and this has made things difficult for Donald Trump. So actually, she's the one who needs to go. Then Donald Trump actually came at him back as Attorney General, which I think upset parts of the base. So there has been an effort, I think, to not make it about the man himself. But I think there is a feeling of disillusionment. For example, I attended this Turning Point Youth Summit a weekend or so ago, where you had lots of young MAGA activists, and you had speakers on the stage, Megyn Kelly, you had Steve Bannon, and they were all talking about this. This is something which really animates them, because it goes really to quite a foundational view of the movement, which is this feeling there is a cover-up, this feeling of a lack of transparency, and almost Epstein is seen as a test case in the deep state keeping things from you. So while it's not all about Donald Trump, certainly this is an area where the base want him to be much closer aligned with them, and when he isn't, they feel that he is being captured by parts of the state.
And so you think that this isn't just MAGA influencers, people with podcasts like Megyn Kelly and Steve Bannon, who you mentioned there, your regular Trump voter in Trump heartland is animated by this and frustrated with his response to it?
In a way, I think this is the million-dollar question. Now, there are activists who are very animated by it. I think we are yet to see whether this is an issue where your average voter who voted for Donald Trump, but, does not go to these conferences on a weekend, actually, perhaps walks their dog, is sat there thinking,
has a life.
I'm not going to vote. Yeah, I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump. But I think the polling too is unclear because on the one hand, Donald Trump's approval rating is holding pretty steady with Republicans. You can look at some and it's even going up. You can look at others and it's steady or, one down. Pick your poll. But generally speaking, there's not a story of this is, crashing that. However, you poll on the specific questions of the handling of Epstein, and the polling is not rosy, including amongst Republican voters. There's clearly some signs of unease. And there's also, given Donald Trump's own personal relationship back in the past with Jeffrey Epstein, there's plenty of photos of them at parties together. There's interesting polling, which is there is a skepticism from voters that, is actually Donald Trump, does he really not know everything that he's saying? Does he know a bit more? And I think that does at least feed into this idea that this could be damaging in the long term if it becomes a trust issue. The question is just what priority is the Epstein story in voters' minds? And various pollsters will tell you that they still think the economy, health, etc., immigration, that's going to be on top of it.
But do you still think that this is something of a turning point, as we might be asked in an A-level history paper in years to come, because it is not, as you say, some fringe issue. This actually gets to the point of the Trump project. The deep state is trying to hide things from you, and if you just look at the facts of this case, there was a cover-up relating to a very powerful, well-connected paedophile. And so if you have some of Trump's base thinking, even just a little bit, is he actually draining the swamp as much as he said he'd be? That seems like quite a moment, doesn't it?
I think it's a moment in the sense, what we can say at this point, and things are still shaking out because the line changes from the White House. What we can say is I think this is probably his most uncomfortable row to date since returning to the White House. If we look at some of the other positions he has taken, which are not natural Make America Great Again positions, or perhaps they're not natural traditional Republican positions. Tariffs, for example, horrified lots of the party. Intervention in Iran horrified lots of the base. But yet Trump had the stature and the authority to actually mold his party in a way where they went along with it largely. I think this is probably the area where he's had the most kickback, and that you can see that from the sense that he has been saying it's boring, why are we still talking about it, and then has chosen to change position in response to an internal backlash, it looks like. I think it definitely is making him more uncomfortable than other rows. And then the reason where I think we don't quite know how much of a moment in terms of changing the presidency or so forth, in terms of how this goes for him, is on Friday we had a situation where he is now asking for the release of some files. Now, we are waiting to hear if those are going to be released. There's a chance the judge may say no. And we're also waiting to see if more comes out about Donald Trump's friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. And that's what's making actually quite a lot of Republicans pretty nervous, because they just don't know where this is going. So Republicans who are elected, who have constituents back home who would quite like to be re-elected, they are nervous about going on the airwaves and massively defending the Donald Trump position on Epstein, because they're worried the position might change and therefore you've gone out and said something. And they're also a little bit worried that when it comes to the Epstein files, there could be more information to come out, which would involve the president or other figures, and that therefore means that people feel they're going in a bit blind, and there's certainly an anxiety that this could be an issue which hurts their appeal to voters.